Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. Welcome back. My name is Catherine. I am the podcast host of Chakras and Cuss Words podcast. And today we are going to talk about shadow work. And I'm so glad you are here, ready to take in this podcast and finding more about how to do shadow work, how to do the process of shadow work, what is shadow work. And I'm also going to have some journal prompts at the end of this podcast that will hopefully get you more engaged in doing your own shadow work. Next week, I will release a meditation that will be related to shadow work. And then I will pick back up with the astrology series. And I'm happy you're here. So let's get into it. So, a lot of times I get a lot of questions about shadow work. What is shadow work? Where did the term come from? And how can people use it in their daily lives to create a better existence of where they're at right now? And how can they really tap into learning and healing from the shadow state? So, shadow work is a psychological term that was, I guess you could say, invented or used by Carl Jung. I believe it's pronounced Carl Jung. He was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. He was very popular back in the day. The term basically describes the process of exploring and integrating the hidden or unconscious aspects of one's personality. And we almost see it as the shadow state. A lot of us who are tied into the astrological energy as well as the current energy of just the self. But when we really tie in that cosmic energy as well, we tend to use the eclipse season, which we are currently in right now, that energy of the eclipses as a shadow state, where we're not really concentrating on manifesting as we would with maybe like creating goals or creating areas of insight that is related to a goal. And this area is used more for the shadow state. So these are hidden aspects that are often include multiple things are included in the shadow. The shadow isn't necessarily like this cut clean area of reflection or this very cut clean area of traits. It's very dark and gray. It's not all that black and white. So these are hidden aspects that often include traits, desires, memories, and even emotions that a person might find unacceptable and even shameful, embarrassing, painful, and they can lead to an area where they tend to depress them or they tend to deny them. So, shadow work could include past traumas that we have been through, also past traumas that we include as traits with our own self. For instance, if maybe we realize that some of these generational curses tend to implement the way we embrace our shadow state, the way we embrace our desires or memories or emotions. When I think about shadow work, it really is not just the area of events that have led us to the shadow state, but the own unacceptable behavior of the self, of the unconscious. For instance, it could be cheating, it could be stealing, it could be drinking, it could be when you just take yourself in a dark shadow state. And a lot of you know that when I talk about 1 year that was very challenging for me was in 2014, and I was really in my shadow state. I was really living in a time and a toxic place where it almost felt like I couldn't bear it anymore, right? And it's that painful recognition of allowing us to respect what we have gone through, respect that these feelings and emotions that we are feeling about ourselves that are unacceptable, shameful, painful, can be reorganized, can be recentered, can have an area where the shadow isn't so torturous to live with or isn't so torturous to reflect on. And it's allowing us to engage in our shadow state and to understand that we represent not only the shadow, but we represent the light and getting ourselves out of that shadow state. Of course, in 2014, when I was in my shadow state and I was really just going through it, I did have help, resources through counselors, therapists, friends, family, mentors, spiritual beings, spiritual energies that allowed me to kind of work through the shadow state. And however you choose to work through your shadow work and do it is really up to you, but just know that talking to somebody else, I don't care if it's a paid professional or if it is a bestie, but talking to somebody usually helps get you through it. Engaging in shadow work also involves basically shining a light on the light of the hidden aspects of the self. It's also acknowledging them without judgment. And that's a really hard thing to do, is acknowledging the energies that occurred, the energies that may still be occurring without judgment, and integrating them into the conscious awareness. For instance, if you are doing multiple things subconsciously, and at the time you are just doing it unawarely, and then you look back at the awareness, you look back with reflection and you understand that there is an awareness, there is a pattern, there is a process. This process is essential. It is essential for personal growth, self-awareness, and the individuation of creating and becoming whole and integrating all the aspects of self and integrating that area of moving past the shadow state. And shadow work to me, and that's why I feel like a lot of people who are centered on cosmic energy aren't just like, 2014 was a terrible time for me. And I've moved past it, so I don't need to do shadow work again. No, honey. Shadow work, I feel like, reoccurs. It's kind of like when people say, I'm going on a diet, and they could be fasting, they could be cutting their calories like crazy, they could really be in this strong area of taking in that focus of that one thing. And like anytime we create this one energy alignment, that one thing will grow, that one thing we will be able to tackle, we'll be able to manifest and create intentions and really tackle it on. But when we stop putting energy towards that one thing, for instance, we stop putting energy towards the shadow work, that shadow process will continue to come up. And I feel like that's why a lot of people love to use the eclipse season as a time, because the eclipses are seen as chaotic energy, and it's not necessarily energy that you're going to want to create huge intentions with. You're going to want to kind of reflect, release, and do shadow work with. And so it gives us that point in time of living through the area of the seasonal calendars of the cosmos, of the seasonal calendars of the astrology, of the aspects, understanding that when we work with the energy of the universe, it can help us, it can guide us. And I know everybody's, depending on what hemisphere you're on, your calendar might be a little bit different. But the eclipses tend to kind of be a little bit centered on the northern hemisphere. So if you are centered around the southern hemisphere, your winters are our summers. It's a little bit different. So you would do it vice versa. You would do it where it mirrors your area of eclipse season, it mirrors your area of winter, that energy of hibernation. So allowing ourselves that growth process of becoming whole and integrating all the aspects of ourself. And all the aspects of ourself can be very daunting. It can be very challenging. I know there's some aspects that I'm embarrassed of myself. There's some aspects that are painful. I know I can be extremely sharp with the tongue. And sometimes I could be mean. I don't know how else to say it. I could be a mean bitch. I could be mean. I could be consciously and unconsciously. I can do things that I don't agree with when I'm aware of that shadow coming out. So shadow work takes various forms of introspection, therapy, of journaling, of dream analysis. I enjoy the dream analysis of the shadow state, of the areas of fear. Sometimes our fear, our maybe even energies of realization comes back up in the dream state or sometimes in the meditative state where the unconscious is speaking to the conscious state. So it gives us a chance to reflect on it. I will be honest, I haven't been keeping up with my dream journal like I should, but definitely that energy of dream analysis is something that many of us should partake with, especially if we're having extremely vivid dreams and we feel like the dreams are speaking to us. There's a mindfulness practice that comes with shadow work. So while we can go through the reflective areas of shadow work, we don't want to get hung up on just the area of the shadow state. We also want to acknowledge the mindfulness, the gratitude. By confronting and working through these areas of the shadow aspects, many individuals can develop a deeper understanding of themselves, really understanding how the shadow state continues to rise back up, to come back up, that greater emotional and unconscious tie that we have. And it helps us engage in the energy of the light, of respecting who we are, of respecting our own shadow and working through that work of the shadow. When we think about the shadow, it sounds dark. It sounds mystical. It sounds like energy that shouldn't necessarily be hidden. It definitely sounds like energy that needs acknowledgement. The shadow refers to the unconscious or hidden aspects of our personality. For instance, I'm not going to necessarily show everybody my shadow state. I'm not going to show everybody my shadow. Some people might see it because maybe I accidentally fucked up and I had no choice but to show them my shadow state. Maybe I accidentally did something when I was living in my shadow state that had to come out. It became not only that internal energy that I was holding, but it also became an external energy where people were able to have an awareness of my shadow. It is a hidden aspect of the personality. It is a hidden aspect of not only the conscious, but really the unconscious. These aspects typically encompass traits and desires and emotions and memories that we intentionally repress because we are acknowledged at some point that unconsciousness awakens and we understand, I'm not going to show you my shadow because we know that society will judge us. We know that we are judging ourselves. We know that upbringing, that personal belief, that awareness is allowing us to tackle the shadow. It's allowing us to attack the shadow. We also have to understand that while the shadow is that energy that we are trying to reform, I often think about like the shadow is almost like this prisoner in our body. And yes, there are some aspects that the shadow should not do, cannot do in the external matter, but it is an energy that we are reforming. The shadow is often considered as negative. It's undesirable. Nobody wants to be with somebody who is a pathological liar. Nobody wants to be with somebody who is maybe extremely critical, judgmental, not only on themselves, but also the individuals around them. So the shadow state definitely has a huge implication on our relationships with people that we've created. Our shadow state usually at some time, if we aren't aware of the shadow, at some time that shadow can't always be hidden, and it will become socially unacceptable for others, right? Most people don't want to be an enabler for somebody who is living in the shadow state, because the shadow state is not pretty. It's not a pretty state. It has qualities that include anger, greed, jealousy, selfishness, aggression, and sometimes the unresolved traumas and generational curses continue to implement us. They continue to kind of fire us back up. A lot of us have painful memories that are associated with our shadow state. I sometimes think about that year of 2014, and I think sometimes, what could I have done different if I wasn't in my shadow aspect? If I wasn't in such a toxic place as an individual, I know I would have made different changes. Sure, there was some energies, some awarenesses that I couldn't contain at the moment, but if I was able to redo it, would I be where I'm at now? Maybe I needed to go through that obstacle. Maybe I needed to acknowledge how toxic I could be at my worst state. And maybe that energy alone served a purpose. So embracing and integrating the shadow is a fundamental part of shadow work. It allows the individual to achieve the greater awareness and authentic nature of the individual. The psychological wholeness and wellness and the spiritual sense is very hard for many of us to engage in. But it is something that needs to be done. Could you imagine if we ignored our shadow state, or we had the consciousness where our conscious did not speak of the shadow, where the consciousness allowed the behavior, allowed the motivations and the relationships to continue to engage in the shadow with nothing being wrong with it? To me, that's an area of evil. That's an area of reflection that sometimes the individual has such a energy that is dark, that it's more than just shadow work, right? So for most of us, by acknowledging and accepting these hidden aspects of ourselves, the individual us, the individual, the spirit soul, the soul center, can bring insight into that behavior and motivations of personal growth and healing and transformation. So a lot of us have to really allow ourselves to do that. And when we are engaging in shadow work, a lot of us are like, what is shadow work? How do I do it? How can I uncover and acknowledge and integrate the hidden or the unconscious? What should I do to do this? So a lot of us will look at self-reflection. And self-reflection is a huge one. It's taking the time of introspection, and self-examination is crucial in the aspects of shadow work. We are the shadow, right? If we don't reflect on ourselves, and there's multiple ways that we can do this. This can involve journaling, meditation, setting aside a time to reflect one's thoughts. And that's a lot of times I use the eclipse season, the feelings, the behaviors. I'll acknowledge if I've been very solar plex driven. I would say for the most part, my solar plex is the chakra that I have to work with the most. Even though I do have to balance them all, but the solar plex, honey, that one can get fired up. And when it gets fired up and gets excessive, it's excessive. So that's one that I definitely, and working with this one chakra also allows me to balance the other chakras, because to tame down that solar plex, I'm going to have to engage in the root. I'm going to have to engage in the sacral. I'm going to have to engage in the third eye. I'm going to have to engage in the heart center and the heart chakra. I'm going to have to engage in the throat chakra. I'm going to have to engage in the crown chakra. And I'm not going in any order. I'm just saying that I'm going to have to engage in all the chakras to balance that one out. Also, this involves the area of having a truthfulness with your feelings and behaviors. When I was in my shadow state, therapy was something I did on a regular basis. For many of you guys know, I have been in and out of therapy, counseling, since the age of 13. I had a very traumatic energy around me, very rebellious at sometimes, a desire of wanting to be heard, a desire of wanting to be seen, a desire of maybe not really understanding my focus, not understanding why was I here. Definitely that age alone comes with a lot of challenges. A lot of teenagers feel that they are undeniably unable to have harm placed on them. They just live in the moment. And I was definitely living in the moment all the way to the age of 13 to about 18. I grew up extremely fast at a very, very young age. That is something that maybe when I do my shadow work, maybe wish that I didn't mature physically, emotionally, psychologically so fast. It was a time where I had to, and it was also a time that I had to protect myself. As a woman, I've always been very dominant in certain masculine energies, and it is sometimes beneficial and it's sometimes not beneficial in relationships. But for me as a young child, and growing up extremely fast, there's a lot of things that as I became an early adult that still continue to come up. And in some ways I have to heal the inner child, right? And also heal the early adult, because that energy of the shadow will play out again in my behavior, my cognitive behavioral, and my spiritual behavior. So understanding that there is a therapeutic technique that is very valuable from seeking guidance from others. Like I said, if that's a counselor or if that is a therapist, but understanding that there's somebody who helps you understand your unconscious, understand some of the unconscious decisions you are making, and seeing the awareness behind them is something that I personally believe has helped me. I sometimes look at my friends at that young age that I had at 13, and some of them have not come out as okay as I did. I mean, they've had a lot of obstacles. They've had a lot of challenges and representation of staying in the shadow state, maybe a little bit longer than I did. So I do definitely recognize that not only was my family there for me during my shadow state of a young child, but also I had professional help that helped me get through it. Dream analysis is one that often has symbolic representation of the unconscious, and keeping a dream journal. Like I said, I haven't been keeping up with my dream journal. In some ways, the therapy for me is creating content. If that's podcasting, if that's creating reels or graphics for Instagram. But to me, it's a therapy. It's an art. It's understanding some of the uncover hidden aspects that I think of or sometimes I dream of. But understanding that you can uncover hidden aspects of the self, of the unconscious, and provide insight of resolving some of those conflicts. So dream analysis is good for doing shadow work. Creative expression, I would say, is definitely one of my favorite my favorite tool or resource to implementing the shadow work. Creative expression, engaging in the activities such as creating art, or maybe even just looking at art, I've had people say to me, like, when do you have time? I don't know. To me, that is some of the activities that gets me through this area of working through the shadow work. And allowing ourselves to have time is also one of the biggest challenges. So engaging in creative activities such as art, writing, music, dance. I love dance. Dancing when you clean. Sometimes cleaning can be extremely therapeutic. People cleaning, put on your music, get engaged, express yourself unconsciously through dance and maybe cleaning. You tackle two goals: the emotions, the desires, experiences of the unconscious, creating that area of expression through creativity, can bypass a lot of the verbal communication, sometimes movement, energetic movement. I'm also a huge fan of removing that energy out of the psyche. A lot of people concentrate on Reiki. To me, it's more of a daily practice. I'm definitely in the midst of, I don't necessarily know if I want to do Reiki. I think I want to do a practice that comes more from my cultural heritage. So I have been trying to research more of a clearing that is centered on Latin America, where I'm able to cleanse the energy of the spirit, of the self spirit, and other external spirits and souls who maybe feel that they need an energy clearing, similar to Reiki, but it will be more centered around my cultural preference. I do love the chakras and I do love learning about Hinduism, but I consider myself somebody who wants to learn more about my ancestral roots and more of the practices that they have used in the indigenous population of Mexico. And I don't hear too much of my Italian side's ancestral practices. And I think it's more because my mother's family was very religious, and they were considered a good, strong Catholic family, where, for instance, my dad's side was more spiritual, while they were very religious, my abuela and abuelo, but my dad and his sisters were a little bit more spiritual. And definitely my dad has more of an awareness of the areas of the ancestral traits that I plan on concentrating on. So I would say that one of the other things besides the creative meditation or the creative clearing or the movement of clearing would also be mindful practices, gratitude practices, acknowledging that there is mindful meditation, allowing the light back into the conscious after we acknowledge the shadow. Sometimes when we acknowledge the shadow, we're like, damn, that's deep. The area of the shadow is something that we also want to refeed back with the light and the energy of the clearing and the energy of the reflection. So understanding that the awareness can help individuals, can help us become more attuned to their thoughts and emotions and body sensations by facilitating the recognition and accepting the shadow aspect, understanding and acknowledging and respecting. We have to respect our shadow. Oh, it sounds really fucking weird. Why would we respect something that puts us in such a dark center? Because that is us. That is us. And the shadow is sometimes, there's areas of the shadow, there's pieces of the shadow that you can let out, right? We don't want to let the shadow all the way out, but there are pieces of the shadow. There is area of exploration of the shadow. I mean, the shadow does explore us. But it is definitely that self-exploring and understanding that we can have a compassion towards the self-exploring, approaching the shadow work as self-compassion. Do it in a non-judgmental way is the area that a lot of us have to open up our minds to. Understanding, yes, there's certain energies of the shadow that are very empowering. And then there's certain energies of the shadow that can leave us very embarrassed and also leave us very ashamed. Sometimes when I think about the exploration, the energy of the shadow, and understanding a non-judgmental area, I sometimes think of being promiscuous. And your definition of promiscuous could be different than my definition of promiscuous, your definition of indulging in activities from maybe being promiscuous could be different than somebody else's. But understanding that there is a balance where the shadow has that energy where it's non-judgmental on self is really hard. For instance, I'm going to use an example. It's probably going to be me. maybe at sometimes being promiscuous or creating a solar connection with somebody where you don't really know them at the time might feel very, it might have felt very almost, I want to say almost like sacral chakra and solar plex driven. It might have felt very assertive. It might have felt very, I'm like almost going blank on the word, but it just might have felt like there was this essential fact that felt like the aspect was very assertive or very powerful. It felt very powerful to maybe seduce if somebody was seducing someone, right? It felt very powerful, or allowing yourself to be seduced, allowing yourself to get in that area of energy where the seduction overtook you. And then you create this energy. You create some type of energy exchange with this person. And then maybe you realize that shadow state has now left you in an energy where you're starting to feel very judgmental on yourself. It's not really something that you at the time understood, creating all these soul contracts or all these karmic contracts or creating all these energetic exchanges with people. That is something that I wish, if I was to maybe rearrange as a young age, it was maybe not the promiscuity that I had at a younger age, just because there is a lot of energetic ties. And sometimes those energetic ties, especially when you aren't mature, can definitely bring up areas of manipulation and areas of grooming and areas where at the time you are basically taken advantage of, but acknowledging also that area of power that you may have felt. So sometimes I look at promiscuity as something that could be very powerful, engaging for the individual, but then also comes with a lot of shadow state at the end. Especially if, for whatever reason, this person on a mature level is not really there, or even isn't completely conscious, or the awareness is not completely there, and they are living in a very shadow type energy. And for some of us, it happens at a young age, and that's why we have to do the inner child healing. I even say the early adult healing, the teenage healing. Fuck. I have decades of fucking healing I gotta do, right? So it definitely is something that we have to reflect on and learn from, and understanding if I am promiscuous now as an adult, and understanding that power, understanding that assertiveness, aggression, or even that compassion or sensuality that comes with some of these solar exchanges as an adult is quite different when I'm on a early mind aspect where the conscious isn't as awoke or awaken or alert or aware. And it's like almost like understanding that I accepted whatever judgment or self-judgment might come with some of that promiscuity, because I've fully have the awareness, because I've already done shadow work, right? So overall, the shadow work is a deeply personal, ongoing process. And your shadow work can look totally different than mine, but it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of patience. And overall, it takes a lot of commitment, because shadow work isn't just one thing that you do one day and then it's gone and you're healed. None of us are ever really, really ever fully healed. But by engaging in these practices, we allow ourselves to gradually uncover and integrate the shadow aspect, leading to the self-awareness and our authentic gratitude and our authentic mindfulness and behavior. That is something that a lot of us would like to implement more often, living in the energy of the light. So let's talk about journaling. And some of journaling prompts you can kind of rearrange to make them more accustomed to you. But journaling for shadow work, having a shadow diary is something that I think is beneficial. Devoted just to shadow work, maybe not devoted to your normal journaling, but having a shadow work diary and then going back and reading it sometimes is really helpful. So that's something I recommend, but it's really up to you how you want to do it. You can even create a ritual. You could create that area of maybe the emotions, the feelings that you're feeling. Fold them away from you. When you are folding the little notes, fold them away from you. And you could take time to burn them, to release them back to the universe. I wouldn't still keep them on your property unless it was like a journal format where you can go back and reflect and also see how deep you've improved, how more awareness you have. So reflect on a time when you felt a strong negative emotion, such as anger, jealousy, or fear, and reflect on that negative event, that negative emotion. What triggered this emotion? So these are some of the journal prompts. What does it reveal about your hidden fears and insecurities or unmet needs? So I'll read it one more time for you guys so you can write it down if you want. Reflect on a time when you felt a strong negative emotion, such as anger, jealousy, or fear. What triggered this emotion, and what does it reveal about your hidden fears or insecurities? Identify a reoccurring pattern or behavior in your life that you feel stuck in, or fears that might be driving this pattern. How does it relate to your shadow self? Think about someone you admire or dislike. What qualities do you admire or dislike about this person? This is a hard one, because in all honesty, with the acknowledging external energies, a lot of this is reflection of ourselves with shadow work, but sometimes these external energies, meaning other souls, other spirits, other energetic alignments, do have a direct aspect on our own shadow. So think about someone you admire or dislike, and what qualities do you admire or dislike about this person? How might these qualities reflect aspects of your own shadow? Recall a dream you had recently or in the past. What symbols or themes stood out to you? How might they relate to the unconscious aspect of yourself? Consider a time when you felt shame or embarrassment. What beliefs or expectations were violated in that situation? How does it relate to your shadow self? Reflect on a childhood memory that still invokes strong emotions. How does this memory shape your beliefs or behaviors? What shadow aspects might be at play in this memory? Opening the inner wounds of the child during shadow work is challenging. It's sometimes just challenging to read it, to say it out loud, but acknowledging it definitely is the first step, right? Imagine your ideal self or person you strive to be. What qualities or traits do you admire in this ideal self? What aspects of your shadow self might be holding you back from embodying these qualities fully? Think about recent conflicts or disagreements you have had with someone. How did you contribute to the conflict? What shadow aspects might have been activated in this situation? Well, I already know what mine is. That mean old mouth. Those spiteful words. Honey, I just gotta say, when that throat chakra and that solar plex are vibing, when they're vibing together, your girl could get mean. Whew, okay. I think we need to take a breath in. I know I do, because this is intense. Okay, let's take a breath in. 1, 2, 3. Release. Okay, we got this, friend. Consider a part of yourself that you tend to judge or criticize. What fears or insecurities might be underlying these judgments? How can you show compassion and acceptance towards this aspect of yourself? Reflect on a time when you truly felt alive and authentic. What were you doing? How can you integrate more of that authenticity into your daily life, embracing all aspects of yourself, including the shadow? So I hope these journal prompts have set the intention for you to explore and integrate your shadow aspect in a compassionate and non-judgmental way. Being here is the first step of doing the shadow work. Definitely adapt to these energies, these journal prompts, the podcast in a way that suits your own needs and definitely through your own experiences. And I thank you for tuning in to doing a shadow work journey with me while we are in the integration of eclipse season. So the day that this podcast is released, the solar eclipse on 4/8/24 is occurring in the sign of Aries. So definitely enjoy this time to do the shadow work. And next week, I will be releasing a shadow work based meditation for you. So that's something that you can engage in as well. please feel free to like, comment, and share this podcast to a friend who might be wanting to do some shadow work too. So everybody have an amazing day. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.